Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the international webinar for women in research. As part of the Participate program of the Recirculate and Actuate project funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund. And as it happened, it's actually our last webinar under the Participate program for the year. And isn't it just fantastic to close such a webinar with an interesting topic around women in research? Just a brief background. The African Union, and as well as been supported by different international organizations, laid emphasis on the importance of innovation in Africa, and that it's actually linked to Africa's success. And ultimately, innovations as an agenda, it's actually anchored on the back of research institutions, whether universities or organizations, whatever the case is. And ultimately, the issue is the fact that even though you expect that universities and these kinds of research organizations are supposed to be open, because from an intellectual point of view, the openness in research is quite strategic. But ultimately, data shows clearly, and even evidence, that within these systems is very strong patriarchal, even like agendas and oversight, which limits participation of women, limits gender parity and gender equity. Now, the African Union, in a follow-up report after lots of investigation and interactions in the Agenda 2060, state the future we want for Africa, and I quote, "No society can reach its full potential unless it empowers women and youth and removes all obstacles to women's full participation in all areas of human endeavors. Africa must provide an enabling environment for its women, children, and young people to flourish and reach their full potentials." That is absolutely non-negotiable. And so, our theme today around trying to investigate or have a discussion why it is absolutely crucial and non-negotiable to include women in research settings becomes significant. And believe it or not, we have three incredible women who will deal with the subject matter. And the good thing is the fact that they cover the three main tiers of society. Talking about academia and research, industry and business, and governance and NGOs. So fundamentally, we have in our midst three amazing speakers who will deal with this topic. And obviously, as we progress, there'll be opportunities for questions and answers, and we will try to make it as interactive as possible. So while a speaker is speaking, you don't have to wait until they finish. It's the reason why you have the chat section on the Zoom call. So feel free to leave any comment as you hear speakers speaking, give a thumbs up, ask any question as you progress. There is somebody on the call who will collate all the questions and will make sure that we attend to all questions as soon as possible, as importantly. So I think I will just progress in terms of given an oversight or to put in kind of in a framing what the session would look like. So we're going to have an introduction, which I'm just given. And on the back of that, we're going to be introducing each of the speakers who will give us a presentation on what their topic covers. And on top of that, we're also going to have an open session for what we will regard as a Mentimeter interaction with the audience, and then ultimately move to the next speaker and we can progress. And at the end of the day, we hope we can have a really good discussion on this very important subject matter. Why I'm excited is because we obviously have a WhatsApp group, which we have interactions and discussion. And I've never seen that WhatsApp get so heated up when I ask the question around what do people think about women in research, their challenges and opportunities, and the room lit up. So there's a lot of attention, a lot of engagement, a lot of interest in this subject matter. And therefore, I'm hoping that we can actually get a move on with this and have a good webinar. Is Keck on the call? Okay, So I think at some point in the session, to give an overview of the RECIRCULATE and ACTIL project, because it's important for folks who don't know about the project and why we are putting this together. It's important for us to have an overview of this. So I'll call Keck at some point still to give that overview. So without much further ado, I want to invite our first speaker for the day. And she's an incredible woman, and she's a deputy provost and associate professor at Lancaster University, Ghana campus. She's a specialty. I mean, she's been the head of department of one of the 3 academic departments at University of Hertfordshire Business School in the UK. She specializes in organizational behavior and human resource management, and her research areas focuses on work, leadership, management experiences of women in the labor market and organizations. She also specializes in the Black and ethnic minority women in the labor market, and she's conducted several very important and significant projects on the issues of equality and diversity with regards to the place of women in the place of work. And ultimately, she's run projects for the UK Department of Constitutional Affairs, now the Ministry of Justice, the UK Equal Opportunities Commission, now called the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, and Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK, amongst others. She's positionally placed to talk about women and research. And I have an absolute pleasure to invite, to give her session, Dr. Cynthia Forson. Over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Akan, and good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Very good. What I want to do this morning really is to look at women in research. And the argument that I am making, and I'll put the argument up front, is that women in research in Africa are doubly invisible and doubly disadvantaged. And I'll explain that. And essentially, what I mean is that whether as the researched, i.e. the subjects of research, or as researchers, women in Africa are doubly disadvantaged. So we all know Africa. I don't want to essentially, go over territory that we all know about. It's argued that it's among the fastest growing regions in the world. It's a resource-rich environment, no doubt about that. There is rising constitutionalism and democracy. We've kind of moved away from coups d'etats and in some respects, having people, with guns sitting over us. But at the same time, I believe that Africa is quite complex. And I argue that Africa is a hybrid environment. What do I mean by that? We have formal laws instituted by Parliament, which are reinforced or undermined by traditional practices and cultural norms, and sometimes actually by customary laws, which in some environments are as legal as statutes. Africa is also individualistic as well as collectivist. And the idea is that Africa is a collectivist environment, but we also know that people are becoming individualistic, and a lot of people think about their families only in terms of their nuclear family, while at the same time having engagements with the wider family. It's also a kind of humanist, a growing humanist society, while at the same time we have personal and identity-based hierarchical relationships within the family. It's materialistic. You talk to any young African, they'll tell you they want to make money and make a lot of it. But at the same time, it's very spiritual, both in terms of formal religion, but also with the idea that there is something beyond oneself or beyond the physical that impacts on people's lives. Obviously, with the internet, with films, with colonialism, et cetera, there's a huge Western influence in Africa. But increasingly and recently, Africans are beginning to reclaim their cultural heritage. And you find that more people are engaging in traditional outfits, et cetera. So how about the area of researching African women? Well, there are facts. I don't want to go over them. one, disparities between men and women exist in Africa. We know that. We also know that discrimination against women and girls represents a huge cost for the region. OECD estimates this at $340 billion as at about 2013. And then the sub-Saharan Africa obviously could benefit from greater parity between women and men. So we know that these disparities exist. How have they been explained? Well, to a certain extent, there are three levels of the explanation, whether you're talking about post-colonial theory or any other theory. One, cultural dimensions, which is the belief systems and the controlling attitudes which affect people's choices and aspirations at work, at home, in education, in politics, etc. There are also the structural dimensions at the institutional level. We talk two institutions. One is the family institution, but also the work environment. So these institutional and organizational forms and patterns have an impact or a disadvantageous impact on women in particular. Then, of course, there are the individual dimensions, the women's own choices and the strategies that they take to organize their lives. So, but this is Google's African Woman at Work. In spite of what I've talked about in terms of all these dimensions and the complexity of the African environment, this is Google's perspective or perception of an African woman at work. A beast of burden, in the farm, carrying firewood, etc., etc. So women in sub-Saharan Africa, and I don't blame Google, because to be honest, Google, as we know how Google works, it picks up images from all over the internet and brings them together. So that's what Google found in many respects. But women in sub-Saharan Africa are seen as a homogeneous group of women. They're all generally oppressed beasts of burden. They're underdeveloped, they're disempowered. There's a tendency in research to objectify and commodify African women. And generally, African women are researched from a development perspective. In other words, there's a deficiency model that is taken to the researching of African women. But we know that actually, to look at African women as one homogeneous group really undermines the perception of African women. And Sprong has argued that the idea of African women or men as an a priori category in scholarly imagination and practice presents us with stereotypes that impede much research. In other words, that one-dimensional view of the African women is not helpful for us when we're researching African women. We know that African women as workers do work obviously in very specific female areas, teachers, care workers, nurses, etc., also managers, parliamentarians. But they also exist in very non-traditional areas, such as welding, mining, the army, being pilots, and taxi drivers. We know that African women also are at par with certain Western countries when it comes to, for example, women in parliament. They even exceed it. So if you look at the United Kingdom here, 32%, but there are quite a number of African countries that exceed that. And obviously Rwanda has been at the forefront of this. In the labor force, 56% of women in the United Kingdom, but many African countries surpass this. If you look at women in parliament or women's share of managers, African women don't do so well, but there are some countries that are at par or indeed exceed the United Kingdom. So what should we be doing when we are researching African women? We should be looking at asking deeper questions. What are the gender dimension and impacts of power relations? Who holds power? How does the gender reinforce or undermine it? Where are decisions made? Are they closed or open spaces? How can the barriers be removed? What strategies can be used to transform power? What are the legal, ethical, and business cases for equality that can be engaged with? So my argument is that when we are researching African women, we need to decolonize and contextualize our engagement with women on the African continent. We need to recognize that African women's lives, like those of all people, are fluid and they change over time. And we also need to recognize that their lives are affected by globalization, race, class, geography, whether they're in a low-income country or middle-income country, kinship, marriage, etc. African women's lives are complicated and they cannot be seen from a one-dimensional perspective. What about African women researchers, those who are actually doing the research? Well, academic research shows that obviously academia is a male space, and where there is privilege is bestowed to just a minority of women, professors at the top or older women. There's a disconnect between gender studies, what's happening in the gender studies department, and what's actually happening on campus in terms of women's experience. And obviously the work environment is tainted by patriarchal values. However, there is an increased participation of women across Africa in academia. Although there tends to be a gender blindness in the institutions, and as in most academic institutions across the world, there's a vertical and horizontal segregation in the disciplines. So women are confined to particular disciplines, while men tend to dominate in others. But we also know that women's disadvantage in the academy in Africa is only a function of the wider general gender inequalities in society. And so these spaces are occupied by people who are doing gender, as is done elsewhere. And unfortunately, in researching women, researching in Africa, we focus on gender without actually taking into consideration other strands of inequality that also impact on women: seniority, ethnicity, age, etc., etc. So what's the answer? My answer is we need to do more research. Yet, there's a paucity of information on African women in organizations and in management and leadership, for example. Nkomo and Ngambi found only 43 articles in their research, and I've listed what they found. So really, there is very little research. If you look at the research on African women, particularly in organizations, in management and leadership, there's very little research going on. Part of it, I would argue, is that is the context of research in Africa. You know, problems with access to data, the validity and reliability of available data, limited research support infrastructure in some places, in terms of networks of researchers is growing, but we could do more in that area. There's also a limited experienced editors and reviewers in the context. We need to build a critical mass of researchers who are doing research on the continent. And we need to grow more PhDs and grow more researchers. And obviously, you know, everywhere there are academic workload and tensions. But I have a problem. And the problem is this: even when we're doing research in Africa, research from and in Africa and by Africans is not highly rated or valued. There generally tends to be a marginalization of African gender scholars in the production and dissemination of knowledge production. For example, very few African journals are found on the high-ranking lists of journal lists in the North or in the West, however you want to put it. Very few studies that focus solely on Africa gets published outside of Africa, right? And usually the Western experience is the normative mode by which the African experience is measured. In other words, in order to get published, if you're doing work on Africa, in order to get published outside of Africa, you need to be comparing some African phenomenon to its Western counterpart. So you're doing a comparative analysis of something in Ghana and Germany, or in Nigeria and the United Kingdom. That's the way to get into high-ranking Western journals. And there is very little research. And so in order to break into these high-ranking journals, generally, Africans need to collaborate with non-Africans in order to be able to break into those journals. Yet, there's very little research that's being done by non-Africans on Africa. So it's very difficult then to find collaborators to work with in order to break into those journals. In order to be able to get into those journals, when the story is then told, the African story is being told by non-Africans. And I think that makes it very difficult for African researchers, let alone African women researchers, to be able to break into these high-ranking journals and to move their careers forward and do research on African women. And I think that is a very difficult place to be. So my question, that I would like us to consider is, what can we do to change the perceptions of African women in and outside the continent? But also, who should be telling the stories of African women? Africans, non-Africans, both? You answer the question. Thank you.
That's fantastic. I almost feel like everybody on the group, if you are hearing me, can you unmute your phone? I think I really actually want to hear it. Unmute your phone and give a clap. I need to hear the clap. Everybody. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. I like that. So you can mute yourself back now. So now what we want to do is, Cynthia, so as you were talking, a few things were coming to my mind based on the chat we had on the WhatsApp group. So I'm going to ask you a few personal questions just to wrap up your session. Yeah. I guess let's go first to everybody. Now, everybody listening to me, there are two questions we'd like to ask, okay? And we're going to take them one after the other. Now, the first question Cynthia asked is, if you look at the chat section, there is a link that has been placed, the menti.com link. So click on that link and it should open up a space for you to answer Cynthia's first questions. And as you answer the questions, they will be shown on the webinar directly so we can have a conversation. So everybody click on the link on the chat and respond to the first question. And the first question she asks is this: what can we do to change the perceptions of African women in and outside the continent? Everybody please engage. Fantastic, that's the question. So just click on the Mentimeter link on the chat section. You should open this up and write a very short answer, something we can quickly see, something very, very short that can be captured quickly. What can we do in your view? So somebody said enlightenment. So an overview of enlightenment, knowledge exchange. So exchanging ideas and experiences from one woman to the other, from one man to the other, from one researcher to the other, from one entrepreneur to the other, knowledge exchange. Why do you have to go dark if there is light? So what has other people experienced in their lives, in their processes, and how can you share from those? Expose them, write about themselves. A really good point. The question is, how often do African women actually write about themselves? How often do they feel comfortable and confident to write about themselves? Because like most people would know, in the world we live, if you don't talk about yourself, well, nobody else will. That's actually very, very true. So are we still on the question? Okay. Just a minute, guys. Okay, beautiful. So back to the question. I'm just expressing, what is it? Education, building capacity, tell your own story. Who is the person who spoke about re-socialization? Who said, what do you mean? Anybody on the group who said re-socialization as what should be done? What do you mean? Can you come can you come off mute, please, and explain what you mean by that quickly? Anybody? I like start a blog. Okay, that's fantastic. Start a blog, tell your own story, expose yourself, some more research. I think Cynthia touched on that, because ultimately, if there is not enough information about African women in research on the continent, then the world has, if you like, an opportunity to label us or label African women as they want, because there is not enough work done in that perspective. Why would Google, you Google African women in work, and for me, that's quite compelling because I actually tried it. I know Cynthia said this before in a webinar I attended where she was presenting. And I'm like, really? And go on Google now, everybody. Just type African women in work. And you'll be amazed. The pictures you would see is women carrying a water pot, women in the farm. But does it mean African women don't work in intellectual environments, universities, research organizations, big corporations? And so why are they represented as such? Okay, I think in some sense, that kind of moves us nicely to the next question. So if you go back to the Mentimeter, the next question is this. You can answer the next question. And the question is quite simple, but let's see in terms of grading, what people think about the view. Who should be telling the stories of African women? Africans, non-Africans, or both? Let's see, everybody just vote, please. Let's see what we have. Who should be telling the stories of African women? Is it Africans, non-Africans, or both? So both is winning now, okay? Keep voting, please. Keep voting, please. Keep voting, please. I like where this is going. Cynthia, so just bear with me. I'd like you to come in on this and explain why you think this is the case. So just for a minute, let's finish the vote. So 11-3. So everybody, most people are thinking both should tell the stories of African women. If there is anybody in the chat who just said Africans alone, if you are open, let me know. And I'd like to call you to explain to us why you think it's just be Africans. Let's get diversing views, okay? So both is still winning. Can we maybe an extra 1 minute of voting? Please, if you're on the chat, you haven't voted, please vote. Okay, on the chat section, we also have Jane saying both. So now we have 12-3. You can still vote quickly. RBA says both. So overwhelmingly, it feels like the preference or the choice or the view that both Africans and non-Africans should be the ones telling the stories of African women. I mean, let me play the devil's advocate here. Okay, Cynthia, I'm setting you up, to be fair. Okay, I'm setting you up in this question. So the question is, how would non-Africans know the African woman's story? So it feels to me that the people who said Africans could also be correct. Cynthia, you come in now. Could also be correct, because I think they should first tell the story, and then non-Africans get the story and tell it too. Cynthia, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that non-Africans usually are the ones who tell non-Africans stories. So from just an emotional perspective, one would argue, well, then Africans should be telling the African story. Okay. But from a pragmatic perspective, as I have explained in my presentation, when Africans alone are telling the African story, it remains in Africa.
Oh, I see.
It remains in African journals, in African books, read by Africans. So for me, from a pragmatic perspective, and also from a perspective of educating Africans and non-Africans about Africa, I would argue that there needs to be collaboration. You know, both sides need to be telling the story, using the strengths that both sides have developed as researchers. You know, we have theories, we have conceptualizations from the West that are useful for Africa. And we can use that. And those that are not useful, we can leave by the wayside. So I think I have been advocating for collaboration between African researchers and non-African researchers to tell the African story. Because for me, that's one, pragmatic. Two, it's a way of African researchers also getting into the Western journals and being able to tell their story more widely than just within Africa.
That's fantastic. So now, if there are any questions, keep it on the chat section and we'll come back to that. But I want to make a quick point just to wrap up Cynthia's session. And I see what she means. So I'll give a typical example. So most of us know Professor Keck Semple. Okay, Keck is a Scottish professor at Lancaster University and the head of the RECIRCULATE project. What if I told you that Keck in the last, in the last 15 years or more, has supervised over 20 African students, okay? And don't forget, most of these students have done actual Africa research, okay? So Grace, I'll call you in a minute. Just let me quickly wrap this up. And most of them actually have done African research. But when the paper is published, it's published in partnership with a Scottish professor based in England. So there is a divergent view. There is, if you like, a collaborative view and perspective on the subject matter. But not only that, the story is being also taken up by non-Africans because of the partnership. So the question is, how many women researchers, as a basis to increase their mileage and their profile, have been able to think about partnerships as a fundamental bedrock of their research? Or do you continue to exist in your own little bubble? I will do my little research. After all, it's just little me. You are not little. As a matter of fact, in the global space, there is nobody who knows and is better than at what you do than you. No matter how international Keck is, and he is truly international, Keck has no idea about specific issues in Africa, and so he cannot be an expert in the area. But you are an expert. And so it's about also confidence and how you view yourself and your own story. So Grace, what do you have to say, please? I think you raised up your hand.
Thank you, Odon. I think you have just said what I wanted to say. That
please say it again for emphasis.
No, what I want to say is that when we say both, we need to be very clear that both is both in collaboration.
Oh, I see.
Not one speaking independently of the other. That the stories of African women, if we partner with international scholars and all that, and we tell the story, just like we can also tell their stories. I think, like the speaker said, it gives African women that publicity, international publicity and all that. We need to admit that, in fact, we are also disadvantaged in terms of that publicity, exposure to international journals. And I think that's a start. We shall be together, but once you hold a baby for some time and the baby learns how to walk, that baby is not going to be held hands forever.
That's true.
So thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
That's fantastic, Grace. That's absolutely fantastic. Oh, and by the way, Greg is a top executive and expert in gender development based at Kenyatta University and a partner to Lancaster University. Thanks, Grace, for joining the call and for your comment. Yes, Keck, please proceed. Please, Keck, proceed, please. So Keck wants to respond to my point that why, even though he's a Scottish professor, he's vastly experienced in Africa only by collaboration. Over to you, Keck, quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Akan, and I'm really glad you pointed out the fact that I'm Scottish and not English.
I keep saying it every chance I get.
Yeah. For those that don't know, there is a competitive element, shall we say, between the Scots and the English, which has been going in one form or another for hundreds of years. So I see myself as a bit of a missionary coming down from Scotland to England to people. Anyway, in seriousness, thanks very much, Akan. You raise a very important point, and it does actually relate, in my opinion, to the RECIRCULATE project, in the sense that this is a genuinely collaborative project. And if you look across the team, the core team, but also the wider family, there is a huge diversity. You know, and I would argue equality, at least in terms of participation. And one of the ambitions that I have for this is that, you know, when it comes to the writing of those papers, and you're absolutely right. You know, I know something, but when it comes from an African perspective, I'm learning all the time. And so that collaboration, not only between, you know, African and UK researchers, or Nigerian and Ghanaian researchers in the UK or whatever, but also that gender balance for me is really very, very important. And I see that as a very, well, let's say, easier way to enhance people's profiles in an equitable way. Okay, through acknowledgement of the work, of course, but also in terms of publications or subsequent grants or whatever that might be. Okay, that's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
This is actually a very powerful conversation, and I think I want to drop a very important point. And because the more you talk about it, and I can remember in all of Cynthia's presentation, I know she's Ghanaian. She's Ghanaian British. Am I right, Cynthia? Yes, you are.
Yes.
But if you notice, Cynthia never mentioned the word Ghana in her presentation. Every time she mentioned something, she kept saying African women. So it almost feels to me like even that subject matter of the African woman have even African women researchers understood the importance of collaboration between countries. Mm-hmm. When last did a Nigerian woman researcher at the point of writing a proposal say, but wait a minute, let me find out if there is somebody in Kenya who has similar issues and we collaborate in research and write this paper. By so doing, you are also exposing yourself to a new terrain, a new environment, a new opportunity, even a new opportunity for funding that you've never considered because of that collaboration. So I'm talking about the fact that we have to work collaboratively, not only between African globe and the global space, even within Africa, there's still a huge struggle. Now, we're going to come back to this later, but I think it's the right timing to move on to the next presentation. So I'm going to introduce a very special lady. And I say special because you will see what I mean by the time you hear her out. Now, she'll be speaking about women in entrepreneurship. So Cynthia focused on women in research. Let's go to the next level, women in entrepreneurship. Now, Dr. Lola Dada is a senior lecturer and associate professor, the director of the PhD program in the Department of Entrepreneurship and Strategy at the Management School of Lancaster University. She's been a past editor for the Journal of Small Business Management. I mean, I'll tell you, she's serious. I mean, she's got a bachelor's degree, first-class honors in economics, and MSc degree awarded with distinction in corporate and international finance, and a PhD awarded, and this is interesting, with no corrections in management. But I lost count how many corrections I had to add for my PhD. She's top-notch in her field. And before joining Lancaster, she worked at Durham University Business School, at the University of Surrey Management School, and she's obtained a master's and doctorate degrees, respectively. She's a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy in the UK, and also been a visiting scholar at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, in Austria. Absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Lola Dada. Over to you, Lola.
Thank you very much, Hakan, for the kind introduction. I've got problems with the access to the screen share. So Alan, can you put my, yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning to you, everybody. And thank you, Cynthia, for setting the scene with the presentation. So my presentation will focus around researching African women entrepreneurs. As Akan rightly said, my specialization is in the entrepreneurship field, and I will be focusing especially around what we know presently, the up-to-date literature, the up-to-date study, up-to-date research around African women entrepreneurs. So moving on quickly to my next slide. What amazes me about African women is the extent to which they spot opportunities, the extent to which they explore opportunities as a result of unfavorable conditions that they find themselves in. And we are quite fortunate in Africa because the African continent is saturated with so many entrepreneurial opportunities. And this is summed up by quite a lot of background noise, by Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika. Given the diversity of the audience we have here, I know quite a number of people may not know who she is. She's a highly successful businesswoman, a multiple award-winning entrepreneur. She has sat on a number of corporate and not-for-profit boards, amongst others include the First Bank of Nigeria, Cadbury Nigeria, the Convention on Business Integrity and the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. Ibukun has high interest in social issues and issues that deals with women. And it's no surprise that she is a co-founder and the past chairperson of Women in Business Management and Public Services. Here she says that she comes from a place where there are opportunities. Africa is filled with opportunities staring you in the eye. And in Africa, it's just looking for who has the courage to explore and exploit those opportunities correctly. And while we have so many depictions of struggling female entrepreneurs, we have a lot of success stories from Africa. Going on to my next slide. One of the influential African female entrepreneurs that some people may not know of, but most people from Nigeria should know who she is Mrs. Folorunsho Alakija, a highly successful female entrepreneur, now one of the wealthiest women in Nigeria, not just Africa, but one of the wealthiest women in the world. She's a billionaire. She's a philanthropist. She started a business from what most people will consider as the traditional female sector for female entrepreneurship in Africa, from the fashion sector. Now she has branched out into more male-dominated sectors, from prints and promotions to highly technical digital printing. She's also an executive of her family's oil exploration and production business. Not just that, she's also an executive of a property development company. So here we have a successful and highly inspirational African female entrepreneur. And I will just go on to the next slide to give you another example to show that African female entrepreneurs are influential. We have here Dr. Divine Undukluka from Zimbabwe. So if we have Zimbabweans here in the audience, they would know her. She also operates within what most people will regard as a male-dominated sector for entrepreneurship. She runs a highly successful security business, and she's the winner of the prestigious Businesswoman Woman of the Year award by Forbes last year. The award recognized the significant impact that Dr. Divine has made to the business landscape in Zimbabwe and across the African continent, and especially to the security services industry. This lady is regarded as an inspiration to so many other women in business in Africa, and is regarded as an entrepreneurial game changer in Africa. So this just gives you an idea to show that African female entrepreneurs are not just strugglers. So while we know about some visible female entrepreneurs, as Cynthia rightly said, and going on to my next slide now, much of what we see tends to be about the invisibility of some specific entrepreneurial females. These are those that would operate mostly in the informal sectors, yet their contributions are significant. Many of these females run businesses that are quite important to the aims of the RECIRCULATE and the ACTIL projects, which today's webinar is designed around. So some of them run businesses in the water and sanitation services, such as recycling services, providing water supplies to domestic and commercial premises, running laundry operations, cleaning businesses. What is quite unfortunate in most cases is that most of these businesses remain micro, they remain at the small scale, and many of the women running these businesses continue to struggle for various reasons. And it is the context of these categories of female entrepreneurs that, from my perspective and studies, I believe offers transformational research opportunities for scholars in terms of African female entrepreneurs. Now, to my next slide, you will see here that African women entrepreneurs, many of them that are invisible in the global stage, they operate at a stage of stagnancy. Research has shown that majority of these invisible female entrepreneurs, they operate their businesses out of fear, even out of frustrations. The literature has also shown that businesses that are owned by women are often categorized as survivalists. Survivalists because they are started out of the necessity to cater for basic needs, necessity to complement their household income. These businesses start from a smaller base, and the literature has shown that they would either close within a few years, or their growth would even just continue at a much slower pace if they do not close. What we know, based on recent studies, which was conducted by VISA in 2020, is that African women entrepreneurs, they face so many challenges, but the article by VISA particularly highlighted 4 major challenges that act as constraints for African women entrepreneurs. The first is the cultural barriers regarding the role of the woman. Most will see the woman as the child bearer and the home manager. So they are people that should sit at home. Another barrier that was reported in this article by VISA this year is that most women entrepreneurs face challenges running their businesses because there is a shortage of role models for them to look up to. Another category found, which most of us will be aware of, is the lack of access to financial assistance for these women to actually grow their businesses or even to operate on a day-to-day basis. And finally is the fact that many of the African women entrepreneurs that we do not see or we do not know much of, they are constrained because of their limited educational opportunities. That said, and on to my next slide, what research has shown is that Africa is the promised land of women entrepreneurship. And here I've got a study reported by Roland Berger, where they have used data from 19 countries over a period of years, from 2012 to 2017. What they did was to use a machine learning model, including algorithms, on different socio-demographic data on female entrepreneurs in Africa. And based on this, they categorized African women according to 4 categories: the struggling, those from the struggling countries like Ethiopia, Mali, those from the thriving countries like Kenya, Tanzania, those from the emergent countries like Nigeria and South Africa, and those from the traditional countries like Algeria and Egypt. Now, what they found is that female entrepreneurs contributed between 250 billion to 300 billion US dollars in terms of their contribution to African economic growth, based on the base year of 2016. And this is actually equivalent to about 13% of the continent's GDP. What is particularly more surprising is that they found that the share of African women starting their own business is particularly high relative to other regions. So you'll see that in Africa, the share of women starting their businesses is the highest worldwide, 24%. Relative to other regions, for example, Latin America and Caribbean has got 17%, North America 12%, Middle East 9%, Southeast Asia 11%, Europe and Central Asia 6%. So even despite all the struggles that African women face in starting their businesses, they still have the highest share. Now to my next slide. What we will, however, find is that even though, despite the high rate of business startups by African women, Africa is still the only region in the world where more women than men choose to become entrepreneurs. This was based on the World Bank data from 2018. Also, in spite of the highest number of female entrepreneurs starting their businesses in Africa and running businesses in Africa, it's highlighted that the major problem arising for the barriers these female entrepreneurs have is the fact that they have the least supportive entrepreneurial frameworks globally. And if I go on now to my next slide on latest research on female entrepreneurs, it shows that there is a lot of room for African scholars and also non-African scholars to actually conduct research in the African context on female entrepreneurs. Why? Because a 2020 study by Said and Enslin shows that we now know a lot on female entrepreneurship in developed countries like Europe. But we still do not know much about women entrepreneurs in Africa. This study also emphasizes the fact that support is important for women's success in business. And one of the most important implications drawn from their study is that female entrepreneurs need to work collaboratively in order to support each other, in order to strive within the community, in order to become business leaders. And this will lead me to my final slide. Now, with COVID-19, it becomes more important for us to look for ways in which we can support research on African female entrepreneurship. Based on my research and what literature has shown us, that support is very important for females to thrive in business. I will finish off by discussing some franchising frameworks that can provide an inclusive business model context for research opportunities. This would help, I believe, to build the entrepreneurial capacity of women. Entrepreneurial success in the literature for women includes several aspects, such as their wealth, their social status, profitability, survival time, stability, performance, among several others. This was documented in a study by Spinder Daliwa in 2019. Now, what we can be exploring in terms of franchising frameworks for supporting African female entrepreneurship research is to bring together successful female entrepreneurs with the less successful or the less visible female entrepreneurs using different types of franchise business models, notably social franchising, micro-franchising, conversion franchising, and co-branding franchising. Before I go on to talk a little bit about them, I will just explain briefly what franchising entails. Franchising is a contractual relationship where you have a franchisor who can be an individual or an organization. They've created a business, they will grant the right to another individual or organization, that is the franchisee, to use the franchisor's trade name in order to replicate what is the franchisor's tried, tested, and proven business formats over a period of time, with the franchisee paying fees and royalties to the franchisor. Now we have over 2 million franchise outlets worldwide. And yes, I did a count. Most people, when they hear franchising, they just think of fast food restaurants like the McDonald's. No, franchising is now widely adopted in over 100 industry sectors, from transport to telecommunications, to financial services, to hospitality, to retail sectors. What we should do in terms of research is to explore how to transition female entrepreneurs from micro and small scale businesses to more prominent businesses, such that successful female entrepreneurs can act as franchisors that will provide mentorship, training, support, digital literacy, and possibly opportunities to even internationalize. This would certainly help with business growth. It will serve as intervention mechanisms. And it would also help to take off some of the burdens of financial constraints that most of the female entrepreneurs face. So if you look at social franchising, for example, successful female entrepreneurs, like Mrs. Forson that I mentioned, she's a philanthropist. She will be happy to give an outlet to a low-skilled entrepreneur. Micro-franchising, micro-scale female entrepreneurs that are less visible can even partner up with successful female entrepreneurs that may be running micro-scale businesses as well. Small-scale, less visible female entrepreneurs can convert their businesses to a franchise business in partnership with a successful female entrepreneur. Finally, less visible small female entrepreneurs can co-brand their ventures with successful female entrepreneurs. So I will like to leave and finish off by saying, exploring how different franchising frameworks can help support and change the representation of African women from being strugglers will be important to explore in research projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lola. That was very, 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 very enlightening. Many figures that quite surprised me. That African women actually the most entrepreneurial in the world and in terms of starting a business. I think that's phenomenal. So I think in some sense, okay, before I come to a discussion, I think let's kind of get some responses and feedback from the group. I think we can actually start asking some questions. I guess I want to ask you a question quickly, Lola, if I may. In your view, what, besides the fact that obviously there is this issue around obstacles of support frameworks in most African countries, in your view, if you were to pinpoint maybe one or two things that has made those women you highlighted, those powerful women you highlighted at the beginning, what is the one or two things or skills you think, your view, you think is the reason why they became or they become what they are? Because you've told us that Most of these African women just stay at the micro level. What is the key requirement to move from the micro, even if it's to medium, not mega yet, just to jump to the next level, in your view, before we get the next speaker, please?
I have studied and listened to many of these women talk.
Please.
Now, Mrs. Ibukun Awoshika has got very strong networks.
So network, okay, that's interesting.
Mrs. Folorunsho Alakija has got very strong networks as well. These are women that are regarded as some of the most powerful women, not just in Africa, but their network spreads across the world. If you look at Mrs. Alakija, for example, she talks about some of the battles she took upon herself when she faced resistance with her oil business against the government, Nigerian government. And she prevailed, and she's still running successfully. So I would say they've got strong networks. They're obviously well educated. So these are some of the factors that stands out in terms of these women.
So it feels to me that it goes back to even what Cynthia said. We were speaking about collaboration or partnerships. It says no matter what we do or where we go, you almost can't underestimate the significance of networks and partnerships, and the fact that you cannot do it. If you want to grow, you cannot do it on your own. So the question comes, every entrepreneur in the room, have you woken up in the morning and said, well, who can I work with? Who is doing what? Who can I partner with? Because as long as you remain in a little bubble, you will remain in the little bubble. So that's quite exciting. Now, I think to make it easy for us for the interaction of questions, I think it's probably best we go to the next speaker, and then we can wrap it up with a series of questions which everybody can engage, and then we can wrap it up. So please, if you've got any question in your mind based on what you've heard Dr. Lola say, in terms of women entrepreneurs and the research she's shown, please, can you represent those questions in the chat section, and then we'll pick it up afterwards. But I guess for time's sake and to give us some more time for interaction, let's take the last speaker and then we can talk. Now, I want to introduce the last speaker for today. And I think I'm comfortable calling her a very good friend of mine, and she's absolutely phenomenal in what she does. So I want to call on, just 1 minute, please. Yes, very good. So Professor Caroline Thoruwa. Caroline Thoruwa is a professor of organic chemistry at Kenyatta University. Kenya, she holds a PhD in pharmacology from the UCL School of Pharmacy, University of London, and Master of Science in Chemistry from Kenyatta University, Kenya. She's currently Director, Africa Center for Transformational and Inclusive Leadership, ACTIL, at Kenya University. She's also the chairperson of the African Women in Science and Engineering, AWSE, and the Secretary General of the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists. Now, so talking about women in work, women in organizations, women in sciences, Caroline is the go-to woman. So she wants to give us an overview from our perspective of the issues and opportunities with women working in those organizational spaces. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oops, I have a... Hello, let's see. Oh, let's see.
You're going to share your screen, Caroline?
Yes, I'm trying to share my screen.
Yes, I'm trying to share my screen. Echo. Where's the echo coming from?
Is that okay now? Yes. Yes. Can you see my screen? Hello?
No, we can't.
I can see a PowerPoint.
Okay, yes, we can see the screen, yes.
Okay, you can see the screen?
Yes. But I think it's beginning on the 41st slide.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. Okay, so basically I'm actually going to talk about just gender equality in terms of the topic. And of course, talent is required for solving our problems in society. And it's so important that we have STEM talent. And we know that the demand for STEM talent to deal with global challenges is much greater than the available talent. And we know that we need STEM talent, whether it's men or women, in order to promote research and to solve our issues in society. Women are underrepresented. We all know that women are underrepresented in STEM. And just basically to show enrollment of women in education globally, but just to focus more here on sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at, this is more, primary, secondary, and at the tertiary level, we have very few women enrolled in research and education, but progress has been made. And again, looking at the proportion of women and men in higher education, the trend from bachelor's to master's to doctoral and research. From here, the blue, I know normally blue is for men, but in this diagram, blue is for women. And you find that at the bachelor's level, women and master's level, women globally, women are more, but after that, women begin to drop off from doctoral and research career level, and men, of course, increase. So that's the status globally. And this just sort of like indicates the loss of women at the master's, doctoral, and research level. And when we look at the women in research in sub-Saharan Africa, we have quite a wide variation, from Namibia having 43% of women in research, and all the way down to Togo at 10% from 47. And the average is at about 25 to 28% of women in research in Africa. And as you all know, most of the women are in blue here and the men in purple. Most of the women are in the social sciences and humanities, whereas men, of course, are in the hard sciences. There's a clear gendered pattern in higher education. So there's always a underrepresentation. Actually, we normally talk about the leaky pipeline, where women are, actually, we've already said at the bachelor's, master's, they're okay. They're in fact in higher numbers. But when we get to graduate school or postdoctoral and research, we can see how they really drop off to about 28%. Women are dropping off. There's a high attrition rate. And so the question is, how can we retain them? These are the women who are going to contribute to, profitable research, who are going to change the issues. And basically, we're talking about loss of investment when we lose women. Here's a scientific and academic career pipeline, which we're all familiar with. And of course, we know that there are issues at every level, whether at the education level and the career level, there are always issues and challenges, and it's usually related to individual, institutional, or at policy level. And the general approaches that have been used, of course, has been the approach for many years is to be increasing the numbers of women. But we've seen that even though you increase the numbers, they drop off. We need not just to increase numbers, but we need to retain them as well. And so approaches, of course, like if we look at the numbers in sub-Saharan Africa, we're still few. We still have to work on increasing the numbers, but we also have to increase on retaining them. And so other approaches, of course, has been to remove structural barriers in institutions that also make us lose women. And of course, there is this issue of gendered innovation, which stimulates excellence. And basically, in terms of, I think we're all aware, issues of affirmative actions have been taken, providing scholarships, networks have actually been done. In institutions, we've had lots of things that institutions have been trying to do to promote gender equality, introducing policies, having gender centers, issues of sexual harassment policies, and also the importance in institutions of having sex disaggregated data, and all these issues that hinder women from progressing, and trying to address them in our institutions. Other things has been we also try to promote women joining associations that can provide support for them. The associations I've put there for chemistry associations, but everybody knows would have their own associations and national academies, which have been very useful in supporting women. And I just quickly want to talk about having associations and even having them at the university level. And just to mention how at Kenyatta University, we have an association for, we call it Kenyatta University Female Students in Science and Technology. So we bring the women, female students who are in science and technology together and into an association. And the program that we've been having it's a holistic approach where we realize it's not just one thing that works, but several. And so we have seminars on gender issues, leadership, career topics, topical things that are relevant to them. We take them on industrial visits. We link them up with mentors. We have prize giving and school community outreach. What we're saying is we need to start with having such associations to support them from the university level. We have a resource lab specifically for them. They call them the CUFEST students. And so this is where they meet regularly. They even have computers specifically for them and other resources to encourage them. We take them out to various organizations, Total Kenya, different. We also have prize giving. Prize giving has really inspired and motivated them. This was the very first chairlady we had in CUFEST. And now we're really proud of her because she has gotten her PhD and she's actually teaching in a university in the US. And basically, she says that her involvement with CUFEST made all the difference for her, and especially prize giving. She said that inspired her to work very hard. This was also another CUFEST chair lady. Now she has gotten her PhD in Oxford University, and she's come back to Kenya and she's working in one of the NGO research institutions. We're saying that that can motivate students. Just to mention a little about African women in science and engineering, what we want to do is to contribute to supporting women in science and engineering and to enhance their contributions in research, education, and the development of the continent. And basically some of the activities that we do, conference, workshops, leadership development, networking, partnerships, programs. We have a special programs for teachers. We want to bring teachers and make them sensitive about gender issues and how they affect young girls and their uptake of science and research. So basically our association is international, based in Nairobi, but we have members in different parts of Africa. And we also try to promote women in specific areas. We recently started Women in Biosciences. And so they come together and support each other in research. We're also a member of the International Network of Women Engineers and Scientists, which brings different networks in science and engineering together to support each other and support women in science and engineering. And I think I would have to say that many of us who have been associated with many of these institutions have benefited just from the collaborations and from the knowledge that we have learned. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on gendered innovations as being part of the topic for today's webinar. And because it's an area that many of us have not really been concentrating too much about. And basically, it's when we talk about the gendered innovation, we're talking about integrating sex and gender analysis into research and trying to focus on research to make it more inclusive. And really it's an area that would increase the focus on women as subjects and also as researchers. And we're saying that this is very important because there has been hidden gender bias in science and engineering for a long time. And in most cases, we don't consider sex or gender as variables within the research. And we are saying that we need to do that. In many cases, the male body has been considered the norm as the primary subject of study. And many technologies are designed exclusively around men. So what we're saying is we want to look at the gender perspective, and it's important because when we don't do that, then we don't get the complete knowledge in science and technology. And many times research does not disaggregate data when by sex, even if when both sexes have been used, or they omit that they omit to report which sex was used, and this results in results which is not the best that it can be. And so what we're saying is we want to promote research where we're looking at the different gendered aspects looking down. And so I want to give the specific examples of the development of cars and seat belts. And basically the development of cars and even the seat belts have always been, was done using men dummies to test them. And so the results work for men. But if you're a pregnant woman, you find that the safety belt can actually affect your child, or it can actually, if there's an accident, the child can actually, the fetus can be lost. And so we're saying gender should look at both. And even if they are using dummies, then you need to have both female and male dummies to test your products. So we need to have a balance in our research. Osteoporosis, always known it to be a problem for women and older women. And we find that most of the products to deal with osteoporosis have always been done using research where women have been screened, diagnosed, and but little research has been done in terms of osteoporosis for men. And yet men also are involved, also have fractures. And men over 75 account for hip fractures. And when men break their hips, they die more often than women do. And so you tend to find that treatment had been used using data from women. In fact, the data had been gotten from young women, and that's the data that is used to develop men. So to be safe. And just to give a further example of the importance of looking at gender or sex issues in our research, which is what many times we don't. I'll just say, if you do research and you want to test on animal models, many times they're tested on male animal models and not on the female. How would that affect the research? Other issues of screening, the use of ionizing radiation, but it has been found that that is more harmful to women than to men, and it is better to use other things. So research, looking at the effects of products and research on men and women is very important. And just give an example of one of my colleagues who has been producing traditional vegetables. Traditional vegetables are very popular in Kenya, and she has been working to improve on new varieties. And she found that when they tried to produce very high yielding varieties, they were able to produce several types, high varieties of traditional vegetables and medium yielding. And they found that if they did not include women to find out about how they would take up the products, then the community did not take it up. So they now said we have to include women. Whenever they have organoleptic tests, they have bring in women and ask them to taste the products. And it was interesting because they took up the medium yielding variety instead, because it tasted better and they were able to take it up. So that's so important to include women when we're coming up with products. And also the issue of post-harvest products. And somebody developed products which were more resistant to insects in the storage. However, when it came to boiling the beans later on, they took longer to boil, and because they were harder, and the women just didn't take it up. So it's so important to understand how women take up research. So we really need to think the standard and reference models in research, because we can lose money, or we can lose, the products that we're trying to develop for society. Just talked about how medicine sometimes have had to be withdrawn because one sex or another was not able to take it up. Just to give an example of also the potential loss of customers, Apple's Health Kit, which has an app for iPhones, their app was supposed to track all kinds of biometric data and from blood pressure and whatnot, but they failed to take in the female menstrual cycle. And so the women didn't take it, all right? So Apple had to withdraw it, fix it, and relaunch it. So really, that's an expense. So what we're saying is, let's start with women, continue with men. It's serious because gendered innovation leads to equality, sustainability. People will retain and keep and hold on to that which works. And it gives us better understanding of disease and products that we're coming about, and presents interesting market opportunities. So what we're saying is, don't leave women behind. If we have women, we need to have women in our research teams. Having women makes diverse teams, and we're more likely to come with new ideas and perspectives. It improves the intelligence of a research team. And we know nowadays women are more educated. They're no longer sitting back at home cooking, but they're highly educated. They have more political clout, more purchasing power, and they're demanding technologies that work for them. So what we're saying is, let us improve the situations for women in our institutions, and we want to increase the number of women. We want to retain them. We want to ensure that these are gender diverse. We're saying that research and innovation must be urgency, because global challenges cannot be resolved without inclusive knowledge production. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's very interesting. I have never heard a talk that not just, generally when I hear talks around gender, that's why you learn daily in this kind of webinars. Generally when I hear about talks on gender and the whole thing around women in research and work, I mostly hear it from a perspective of women participation. We need to increase how many women are involved in research groups. I think Bokani on the chat even mentioned that. How can women be involved in research management, being at the head of committees, increasing their participation in the group? But what you said as well is, on top of that, there's a different dimension around the design of the research itself, taking cognizance of women, and if you like, women perspectives, which for me I've never considered. As simple as like a seatbelt. I use seatbelts all the time. Which I find absolutely fascinating. And you can imagine if you went through a series of different levels of subject matters, the issue of gender will keep popping up. And as a matter of fact, as long as men are the one designing these projects and leading these committees and setting up these test cases, they just focus around using male dummies for tests and so on. which I think is a new, total new ball game entirely. So I found that truly, truly incredible. And but I mean, I've had some comments in the group. So thank you so much, Prof. That was really, really powerful. I'm going to call on somebody who's made a comment on the group, because I told you I'll be picking some comments in the group. So Cynthia, could you tell everybody that challenge you spoke about, the fact that even though you are a woman in entrepreneurship, you still have a particular challenge? Very, very briefly, just for like maybe 30 seconds or a minute. Please, Sylvia, if you're on the group, could you speak to that quickly?
Yes, yes, I could. Yeah, because why we actually are not growing as entrepreneurs with experience is because they take us for granted. And it's high time, you know, we really rose and say, this is what my value is, and this is what I demand to have, and this is the place where I want to sit. Because they can't continue using somebody from their experience, and yet there's no benefit of what they get. So you remain at, if you are at micro, you remain there. If you are at small, you remain there. So we have to have a system where we've got a process of growth, so that at the end of the day, you can also mentor others, and you can give yourself as an example, you know, that I was helped through this program, and this is what has enabled me. But not where every day just giving yourself, giving your free time, giving everything that you have, and at the end of the day, you do not benefit anything. And people are thinking, oh, they are successful because 1, 2, 3, 4 help them. Meantime, there's nothing that you've acquired.
That's very, very powerful. I think that actually happens quite a lot, where you require, it's almost the same thing when you're talking about researchers who want to do maybe a research around community engagement. And all they do is, at the point of collecting the data, they go to the community, collect all the data, then they leave the community, maybe pay them some peanuts and go write up the report and get some big grant, and that's the end of it. So actually that inclusion has to be genuine and actually well integrated. So Caroline, just going back to you, and I'm throwing this to the two panelists, so that's to Lola and also to Cynthia. You mentioned about the leaking pipe. I've never heard that term before. It's a new term now in my vocabulary. The fact that the pipe begins strong, okay? And as you progress down the pipe, when you're supposed to be growing at, say, bachelor's degree level, women are equal in terms of numbers and capacity and participation like as men. And as you progress to master's degree level, they begin to drop. And by PhD and main research professional level, they fully drop. That pipe has leaked up totally. So I want to ask a single question, which I want three of you to answer from your perspective. In your view, what are the key things responsible for this leaking pipe, if you like, scenario? So I'd like you to respond to it very briefly. So Cynthia, you first. This leaking pipe that Caroline was talking about, why are women dropping it? What are the fundamental issues in your view? And then I'll come to Lola, and then I'll come back to Caroline. Please.
Okay, so I mean, as I said in my presentation, you know, these issues are covered at 3 levels. One, at the cultural level, in terms of the norms and belief systems, et cetera, but also government policy. I mean, in areas where, or in countries where, for example, there's free secondary school education, you find that the pipe leaks slower as you go up. Where there's free university education, you know, the pipe leaks even slower. At the institutional level, there are family issues. There are issues at the institutional levels, like, you know, Caroline has talked about, who goes into science and technology, et cetera, But there are also choices that women make as a result of socialization and beliefs about what they can and cannot do. So I think there are 3 levels to this argument. And every time you talk about women, you have to talk about the multidimensional view. It can't just be about women's confidence, or it can't just be about what's going on in the family. We need to have this multi-layered, multidimensional analysis of women's experience.
Sweet. Lola, how would you, I mean, in your view, on an entrepreneurial level, what do you think are the challenges? Why is this leaking pipe situation as well? And what should be the mitigant, if you like? Yeah.
This again, thanks, Akan, goes to what I mentioned in my presentation about the support women get.
Okay.
I believe if women have got appropriate role models to mentor them and to guide them along different key stages, they would keep that focus, that commitment, that progression. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So it comes again to the sort of mechanisms that are there, the sort of structural factors that are there to really help women in guiding them along every phase.
Fantastic. Caroline, please, you spoke about the leaking pipe. So give us some extra if you like, insight as to what is the reason. I mean, because it almost feels, when I hear, and I know it's not the case, it almost feels that if it's just cultural, like Cynthia was saying, then the leaking pipe will continue. But except the culture is changed. But I mean, culture is ingrained in systems. How can you have cultural change? It almost feels like we can't almost cannot stop the leaking pipe, even though we know the pipe is leaking. That doesn't make sense. There should be ways of reducing or at least stopping the leaking pipe. What do you think? I think you're on mute, Caroline. You're on mute. Sorry.
Okay.
There you go. Go on.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're saying that, as has been said by my colleagues here, there are multiple issues. It's not one. There are several issues, and we're saying the issues can be personal, it can be institutional, and even policy level. And so, yeah, some of those cultural things will still be there, but it's changing with time. We know that we have, in a sense, dual careers. You're a mother, and basically, you know, from graduates at that level, time many women will be starting their families. So they have the challenges, the family issues. Then there are things like, and STEM, at least, you know, STEM or even research is not really considered family friendly. If you're a scientist in the lab working long hours, you know, that can have its own problems at home. It can have its own problems for the individual. Sometimes you have to go out for field work and things like that. So and then there's also the hostile environment. Sometimes, you know, you tend to find that the issues that affect women are not so clear. They're kind of like hidden. And unless they're brought out, sometimes the working conditions is hostile. And you know, as a woman scientist or engineer, you might be the only student, you might be alone. So you may feel isolated and excluded. So you may not want to stay there. Lack of funding for research and scholarship. You see, I'd say much as education has opened up, the money you need to do quality research is not there. And so sometimes this can be a long, drawn out process for the women. And some of them will just drop off and leave it if they don't have the funds for research. They don't even have the funds to go to conferences where they can, you know, learn more. So really, there are very many issues within an institution. So the institution itself, most of it, like we've said before, most of the women are at the lower level in terms of leadership. And so they may not be seeing or aspiring for higher positions as well. So really, but efforts are being made by institutions to see how they can support women, how they can, for example, where there are issues of recruitment, which is biased, or for promotions, we try to encourage women to even know what the criteria is. One thing that works well is having mentorship programs, as Lola also mentioned. Having somebody to support you and to guide you is very important. For young researchers, I think what institutions could have is what you might call beginners networks? How can we bring new tutorial fellows, new researchers, and young together so that they're supported to build themselves up? Many times they come to institutions that they're not really quite sure how to find their way around, but having all these support mechanisms can be useful.
Fantastic. I think Cynthia mentioned a really good point. Let anybody, Cynthia, actually, can you actually make the point, please, Cynthia, please? You made two important points on the chat, which I think you should bring up. I think they're very, very important points.
I think we need to bear in mind that these issues are not just African issues, and that they do occur in, patriarchy is universal, and there are leaky pipes in every single environment. How fast they leak, how slow they leak, might be different. So the differences might be qualitative, but we have the same problems across the world. The other thing I wanted to say also is that there is a tendency to find solutions that put the onus on the individual woman, on the individual woman to go and network, to find a role model, to et cetera, and that we need to do that in combination with breaking down the structural issues and the structures that cause these problems in the first place. That's what I want to do.
Basically, I mean, women wouldn't have to do it individually if there was a system in place that supports that process in that sense and make it easy for it to happen. Why do I have to go? I mean, the only reason why I'm doing it individually is because if I wait for a system, it's never going to happen. So, but imagine if that system was adjusted, it makes it easy for things to just flow down naturally. Exactly. So let's go for some interactions. I'm going to ask everybody in the group 4 quick questions, sharp questions, which I'd like us to respond to in the Mentimeter. So look at the chat section, the chat quickly, and click on mentimeter.com. You can see in the chat, there's a link that's been placed. And the questions are quite straightforward. And the first question is, can researchers involve, if you like, low-skilled female entrepreneurs during the design phase of the research? First question, can researchers, so it's basically yes or no, but it's just to get us thinking differently. Can researchers involve low-skilled, and in bracket, invisible, folks you don't know, low skill, that market woman, always that woman farmer, that woman entrepreneur, that woman market, those low skilled female entrepreneurs during the research project design phase, so that nobody is saying no looks like a good sign. Lola, is that a sign you were looking for because you said the question?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. I'm sure you'd have been worried if people were saying no or there was any no on the on the responses. So that's a good move. That means everybody in the group is well aligned to the fact that researchers going forward, you should be engaging the low-skilled female entrepreneurs, because guess what? You will be shocked at how much they know. Forget the fact that they are, in your mind, they are low-skilled in that area. The things they know, I mean, have you ever imagined how much they have to know about cost saving to operate at such a minimal scale and still able to take care of the family, send the kids to school, and all of the things they have to do? So you'll be amazed at what they know in that sense. So second question, please. Second question is the reverse of the first one. Can we put it up? Beautiful. And the question is, and this is designed for the entrepreneurs in the room. Can low-skilled, invisible female entrepreneurs engage in university industry collaboration programs? Yes or no? It's quite straightforward. Okay, some good responses. I think this also drives home the message. Everybody agrees. Oh, somebody has said no. I'd like to know who that person is, please. What is your view on that? Somebody said no. Can low-skilled, and it might be a valid point. Can low-skilled female entrepreneurs engage in university industry collaboration programs? Yes or no? Someone said no. I'll be interested to know that person's perspective, why you said no. Because I think that's very powerful. What is your view on why do you think that's the case?
Oh, thank you. I can actually say it, and that's because maybe I'm missing it.
Please tell us, why did you say no, please? Go on.
Yes, maybe I was missing that assurance where that group of invisible low-skilled people need to be empowered and to have the capability to be able to do that engagement. If that has been taken care of, we're assuming it's been taken care of. If that has, then well, the answer is yes. You know,
okay. See, that's actually a new way to look at it. We shouldn't assume that low-skilled entrepreneurs even know how to engage with university-industry collaboration. We shouldn't assume that they do, because if they don't, then they won't. Does that make sense? So I think that's actually a very, very valid point, and I think I absolutely agree with you. So everybody appropriately agrees that for effectiveness, for efficiency, for success, for progress, and all of that great words, the collaboration is absolutely vital. Okay, next questions. Set of questions quickly as we wrap it up. Thanks for your patience, guys. It's an absolutely phenomenal webinar. I've learned so much today. I've learned about the leaking pipe. Oh my goodness. I have to go and read some more about that. What is leaking pipe? And are there some nice plumbers to start plugging and blocking and taking care of these leaking pipes? Yes. We can't be having leaking pipes. Yeah, there should be some nice professional plumbers who can fix this. Yes, second question. Beautiful. So guys, go back again for the last time to the chat section and click on the Mentimeter for the last two questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Now, and the first question, the next question is, in research, does gender and sex aspects have important consequences for the validity and applicability of research results? Yes, no, don't know. Question again. In your research, in research generally, do you think or do you reckon that gender and sex aspects have important consequences for the validity and applicability of the research result? Yes, no, don't know. What do we think? Okay, this is very powerful. So now I want to investigate further. Some people say yes, it's true. Some people say false, and some don't know. So if there is there a rep who said yes? Somebody to kind of volunteer to explain your view. Why did you say yes? Then somebody else who said no or false. Could you express why you said false? And it seems there is no, don't know. So everybody knows what they're doing. So that's good. So you can keep voting, but can somebody who said yes or true explain why? Quickly, please. Anybody?
There's a raised hand there.
Anybody opting to explain why they said true? Please.
Yes. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please. Go on, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oladeola Umani from Ilorin, Nigeria.
Okay.
My view is as part, because in considering the gender balance and also to ensure inclusion in the research work, we should ensure that both gender are not left out. Because it's part of the insight. Though it may not be in the core research work, but if people see that the research work is inclusive, gender inclusive, is going to be a top up and bravo on the team.
That's for the validity and the applicability. I think I see your point, and it's important. And I think, and to be fair, I think inherently, I think there's actually a danger in doing it just for the validity and applicability. I think it should come to the point where you do it because it's absolutely important for the success of the work, not because somebody would look at it and say, well, okay, there's gender inclusion and tick a button. So I absolutely agree with you, but I think that there's a danger in that consideration, which I think is very, very important. So anybody who said false, could somebody nominate themselves and explain quickly why you said false, please? Anybody?
So I said no rather than false.
Okay, please tell me why.
Well, I mean, as you've already said, I mean, I've supervised. I mean, obviously, this is not my area of expertise now. That's my big caveat right now. But as you've said, I've supervised quite a number of PhD students internationally, including a lot from West Africa. And I actually don't see my students or my researchers, shall we say, as, you know, on a gender basis. I see them as individuals.
Oh, I see your point.
And when it, you know, an example of that is that I believe in absolute equity in the laboratory. There's no sort of preferential treatment. You know, everybody, well, I'd like to think that I'm treating people equally. Okay. But an example of this is where it comes to publication of papers.
Okay.
And I've got a lot of papers who have been, you know, have had co-authorship from Africans, UK folks, European, whatever. And you know, it's not about, one of the key things there is who the first author is, okay? So this is the primary authorship. And for me, it's not about whether that's male or female, it's actually about who did the most work on that piece of work.
I see.
Okay, so it could be a male or it could be a female. It doesn't matter to me. It's about the contribution to that work, and that's really my very simplistic perspective here.
I think I see where you're coming from. So from the point of the participation, or rather from the point of the participation or the design of the research, is absolutely crucial to take cognizance of gender and sex aspects. But from the point of the administration, or if you like, the allocation of the research in terms of its validity of the research, whether male or female, as far as you're concerned in that sense, it doesn't matter who, as long as they are researchers. You first see them as researchers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to reiterate that I'm not sure that I subscribe to the first point that you made, in that you know, because it sounded to me like that you were implying there was a gender issue. For me, it's not about that. It's about the individuals, whether they're male or female, and working with them to get the best out of them as individual researchers, and also collectively for the research group as well.
Okay, can we move to the last question, please? I think this is very exciting. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. I'm learning a lot today. And this is actually very simple, also a true and false response. Gendered innovation leads to equity, equality, and sustainability. True or false? Gendered innovation leads to equality and sustainability. True or false?
Can you just clarify what you mean by gendered innovation?
So Caroline set the question. Caroline, could you explain what you mean by gendered innovation? Maybe to help people deciding. I think that's actually a good point. Is Caroline dropped off the call?
What we're saying is where I think considering gender actually in your research, like I gave the example of the seatbelt issue, where male dummies are used and female dummies are not used.
Okay, I see your point.
In the sense, and in any other research, does it have implication? Does using even does using male and female organisms, does it make a difference to the products that you're going to get?
Yes.
And basically, so what we were saying is it leads to equality in the sense that you take care of everybody's concerns. Because if a product that has been produced as a result of research is not meaningful to me as a woman, I'm not likely to buy it, right? And I'm excluded. So whereas, you know, sustainability, if something is useful, then people are likely to use it, and yeah.
So basically, in the process of innovation to create a product or a service, don't expect everybody, male and female, would accept it equally. So that's what the gendered innovation means. Understanding that there are different dimensions and dynamics between male and female. That's what it means. That's explanatory. So obviously the answer, I believe is true, and we can get that from the responses so far. So 9 people think it's true, and I also have lots of responses on the chat section saying that yes, they agree, and that is very, very true. I think that wraps up the session. Right now, to finish it off, I want to call on Kirk to give a wrap-up message, give us kind of a little tidbit around RECIRCULATE as a project, and ultimately wish everybody, well, he knows what to do. Over to you, Kirk.
Thank you, Akan. I'm going to scare everybody and switch on my video. Yeah, nice background though. It's fake, but we wish. Anyway, so I mean, this has blown my mind. This conversation.
It's blown my mind. I've never heard many things like this before. It's incredible.
I mean, obviously, the whole issue around gender is massive, and as Cynthia and other people have pointed out, that although it's a very prominent issue in African countries, it's also an issue elsewhere in the world. I mean, I think it's pretty universal, to be honest, and you know, that includes, of course, the United Kingdom. And I guess I'll continue by apologising for not being here to offer an introduction at the start. I was actually in another meeting and my calendar was wrong, clearly. But the question was why is the inclusion of women in research settings not negotiable? Well, my view on that is that should not be a question. It should be a statement of fact, and that the inclusion of women in research settings is non-negotiable, really, from my perspective. And there's been a lot of discussion around, you know, obviously, gender inequality or equality in entrepreneurial settings, which I know very, very little about. But I do know something about the research environment, both in the UK, obviously, and a little bit in Nigeria and Ghana particularly. But I mean, and someone made an interesting point that the onus for this is on the individual researcher. And I agree with, I think it was Cynthia that said this. I absolutely agree that it should not be on the individual. It's actually, the onus should be on the establishment, I think. And in a research sense, I think the onus should be on the funders to drive this forward. And in fact, within the Global Challenges Research Fund, which RECIRCULATE is supported by, we have to, in that, you know, applying for that money, but it's also become broader now across the funding research councils in the UK, that there has to be evidence of equality across, you know, with gender, amongst other things, as part of the submission. So we have to be able to show, and they expect us to report on the successes of these as well. So that's an example of where it's moved away from, you know, individuals, departments, research groups, institutions, whatever, to actually the funders saying, you know, there has to be consideration and implementation of, you know, equitable behaviour within the research projects. And I fully welcome that. I mean, it's relatively new, it's evolving all the time, but I think it's we're slowly, of course, heading in well, hopefully the right direction. Of course, we also see the emergence of funding opportunities which are entirely directed at the development of young early career researchers, women researchers. So an example would be the Schlumberger Foundation and Faculty for the Future opportunities there. We see elements of that in the, you know, the Commonwealth scholarship programs as well. So I think, you know, it's a very slow and it's a very painful process, but slowly, momentum is heading, in my opinion, at least for what it's worth, in the right direction. I mean, I've sort of taken over the sort of leadership of RECIRCULATE at sort of towards the end of 2019, really. And then, you know, we've been hit really very, very hard by an exceptional circumstance in the fact of the, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, it's hit us personally in our family lives, in our you know, our social lives, but it's also hit us professionally. And the thing that comes through from me is how resilient we've responded to these challenges. We, you know, some people were predicting this, most people weren't listening, and it happened. And from this project perspective, you know, I'm really enthused. I'm really grateful for how people have stepped up to the plate to keep the project going, keep the, you know, the engagement with the wider RECIRCULATE and now Actuate family going. And this Participate program that has developed out of COVID has been a fantastic example of how we can continue to communicate and drive our interests forward collectively in really, really very challenging circumstances. So I'd just like to thank everybody for all of their efforts in maintaining, you know, engagement with the project and making really positive and, you know, impressive contributions to the project at large. I'd also, of course, like to thank the core members of the team, and you know who you are. There's too many to go through. Of course, one's looking at me right now, our pilot, Akan. But you know, there are so many other people who have you know, participated in the Participate program to make it a reality, and I thank them as well. I'm hoping that, you know, for the most part, that we've got through almost the worst of this. Things for 2021. I mean, as in the eternal optimist, I'm confident, at least at the moment, that we will come out of this strongly, in good time, and hopefully 2021 will be a better year for us as individuals, for where we're working, our families and friends, but also professionally and of course with our research projects as well. So, I mean, I think I've rambled on enough. Akan's given me the glare. So what I will just say is I just want to wish everybody a safe, restful, enjoyable time over the festive period. And of course, wish you all the best for 2021. So thank you very much, everyone. And it's been a real pleasure interacting with you and listening to everybody's contribution. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. So finally, I'm going to request again, everybody unmute your mics and let's give a final clap for the audience. I need to hear the clap. The clap on your phone. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Finally, if you look at the chat section, there is a link that leads you to a very short questionnaire. It's about 1 minute. You can fill it up and include your name as you want it to appear on your certificates and also your email address. So look at the chat section. There's a link there that requests for a quick survey if you want a certificate of participation at the end of this seminar. You'll get it in the next couple of days. But you need to fill in that form quickly and write your name as you want it to appear in the certificate and also the email address you want it sent to. That's very, very important.
Hello, Dr. Odo.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, this is Abimbola. You promised to wish me happy birthday today.
Yes, so somebody joined and today's her birthday. So please, can we wish her a happy birthday? Please, everybody.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Birthday.
I think we should sing. 1, 2, go. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Thank you so much.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Abimbola, happy birthday again to you and wishing you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All of you have been absolutely phenomenal. I've absolutely enjoyed the session today. It's been inspirational, it's been motivational, insightful, it's been provoking, and I think it's the right spot. And I'm hoping we can continue in the new year. From me, it's wishing everybody, in case I don't speak to you any longer, a great, amazing Christmas and a happy new year. So remember, if you want a certificate, click on the link on the chat, fill a little short survey, give your full name as you want your certificate and your email address, and that will be sent to you. On that note, have an amazing Christmas and a happy new year. Compliments of the